Good morning. I'm Stormy Peters, VP of Technical Evangelism for the Cloud Foundry Foundation. Welcome to the second episode of the Cloud Foundry Morning Edition. I'd like to start out by thanking all of my sources. So I listen to Cloud Foundry After Dark. I read the Cloud Foundry Advisory Board minutes that are put out by Phil Whelan from ActiveState. And I also read This Week in Cloud Foundry, which is maintained by a group of people that are always looking for help. So if you'd like to contribute to Cloud Foundry, that's one way. As well as I read a lot of tweets and blogs from around the industry. So thanks to everyone for helping make this happen. This is the 5 to 10 minute summary, maybe 15, but I'll try to keep it to 5 or 10, summary of what's happened in the past week in Cloud Foundry. So the big news that got launched by companies is a couple pieces. So VMware launched a Photon platform, which is a way to manage all of the virtual machines and containers with Pivotal Cloud Foundry on top of it. So it's everything you would need in a stack for a cloud native application. And kind of the idea is that a company could go from idea to production in less than a day. So everything you need for a cloud native stack and application. Altoros and IBM also announced that they didn't announce, but they've been working on experimenting on getting Cloud Foundry on IBM's Power 8 architecture, and they have been successful, and they're checking that in upstream. So those are kind of two official news updates that went out in press cycles, but lots of other things have been happening. I personally got to go to my first Cloud Foundry meetup down in Denver. It was a really good group of people. There were probably 70 people showed up, and I think at least half of them, if not all of them, came up and introduced themselves before we got started, which was really fun. I felt very welcomed. And everyone participated, listened very attentively. I gave an update on the Cloud Foundry Foundation, and after that it was followed by a spring demo. Very technical, a lot of good questions in that one too, so that was great to see. And I got some swag. So I got a USB drive that says Cloud Foundry on it with a little logo. And some of you who are more observant might have noticed that there's maybe a new logo or new thing coming if you saw on the splash screen. So watch out for the little ninja rabbit who might be coming. But speaking of meetups and not logos, we also announced this week a meetup plan to offer sponsorships for speakers who want to go to meetups. Because I said last week that's been one of the biggest problems for meetups is getting good speakers. So that plan is all launched. We have a bunch of speakers signed up and a bunch of meetup owners joining the meetup list. So please jump in if you're interested in that. Speaking of new programs and new people, Bridget was on Cloud Foundry After Dark. She started last week, so she's had her whole first week. And they put her in the Cloud Ops team. So they embedded her in the Cloud Operations team for the first week so that she could learn how to use the technology, which I thought was an awesome intro. Can I go sign up for that too? And she said the most surprising thing to her was pairing, especially pairing in the operations space. But she said it worked really well for asking questions and learning. But one of her observations made me think about how we do things in the project and maybe think about how we could do things differently. And she said when you're pairing, you have very little time to spend on Slack or email. So the conversations you have with people outside your pair are necessarily limited not because you're trying to ignore them or you don't love them, but because you're actively working with someone sitting next to you. So that's kind of a different twist on any conversation you have in the room. Make sure you put on the mailing list. This is how are you going to capture a whole day's worth of conversations? It's interesting. Also on Cloud Foundry After Dark, Kelsey Hightower showed up, and he had some great points as always. Two of the points he had, one is he said, obviously it's important for Cloud Foundry to be open source software, and that's how we're going to win in the ecosystem. So if you'd like to hear him explain that, you can go watch that. And then he also made a point for wanting the Cloud Foundry components to be branded and marketed individually for a number of reasons. And I also thought it was interesting, Matt Curry jumped in from Allstate, and said, people want to ask and understand even if it doesn't matter. And that kind of goes on Cloud Foundry is an open source software project. People download it and play it before they use it. So there's really been a theme here. So I think there's something there. So if you want to hear that conversation, you can go to Cloud Foundry After Dark. Also on Cloud Foundry After Dark, speaking of Matt Curry from Allstate, he said there's two people from Allstate working on Cloud Foundry, one on build packs and one on Bosch. Speaking of Bosch, Dimitri was on After Dark, and he was introduced as the Bosch guy. So he also gave an update in the Cloud Foundry Advisory Board meeting on the technology. So he talked about some of the things that they're adding, they're simplifying a lot of the manifest UI, making it simpler to configure, adding things like stem cell hardening, trusted certificates. And there was a question in that meeting from Dr. Nick, who's wondering when Bosch init will support compiled packages. And Dimitri said the support is going into Bosch right now, that they'll be able to support that in the future. So if you're interested or want to push for that, you know who to talk to now. Other updates from the advisory board meeting is Eric Malm talked about Diego. He talked about how they're doing large-scale testing, performance testing, and he also talked about how they're introducing a database service in front of their Etsy database, and that's going to enable them to move to protocol buffers, which will be higher performance. He also talked about how they're continuing to work on supporting Docker containers, things like that. The other big news would probably be Lattice now has BuildPack support, which I think was the last week, but it was announced in the advisory board meeting, which is monthly, this past week. And all the other teams like Mega, CAPI, CLI also gave updates. I found out that Mega doesn't really stand for anything. It's the OSS release integration team, and Mega was just the name that they used. And then both in the advisory board meeting as well as especially this week in Cloud Foundry, there's a lot of really useful tidbits. So if you're working with Cloud Foundry and need tools or just want to learn best practices, I think this week in Cloud Foundry is an awesome place to follow. It's a blog post, you can read it. So for example, this week they gave an example of managing interdependencies of Cloud Foundry release jobs, and how Ruben Koster from Stark and Wayne, which is where Dr. Nick works or founded, wrote a handy script that takes all of the dependencies and makes a nicely formatted table out of them. So there was a whole bunch more tips like that in this week in Cloud Foundry. So I recommend that if you're trying to get better at Cloud Foundry. Another kind of tidbit on how things were run, this one came from the advisory board meeting, I think, is there was a request from Cornelia, I believe, to add, so when you're reading a mailing list thread, you often want to forward that thread to someone, and it's kind of ugly. I've done this a lot, to forward the thread itself. In Gmail, there's like a forward entire thread, and then they get this huge thing that's not actually really threaded. So she asked for a link at the bottom of the thread that would go to the online archive, and they're looking at adding that. In Cloud Foundry After Dark, they talked about a couple of interesting users/customers. For example, Jason Jackson's working with a group in Japan that has 50,000 VMs on an OpenStack installation, and they're using Cloud Foundry now. So it has to be one of the largest OpenStack installations in the world. So it's just kind of interesting to hear about that. They also talked about how Baidu runs Cloud Foundry on bare metal, which is something I know many people are interested in. It came up in the financial SIG in New York as well. So a lot of interesting conversations happened this week. A couple of announcements. If there's anything else you would like to know, please feel free to ping me, or if you have any feedback on this, let me know for the next week. And don't forget, it's the call for papers right now for Cloud Foundry Summit Europe and Cloud Foundry Summit Asia. Cloud Foundry Summit Europe will be in Berlin November 2nd and 3rd. Cloud Foundry Summit Asia will be in Shanghai the first week of December. And in both cases, we are looking for talks about how you use Cloud Foundry or how to use it, or any tidbits or tricks or training. We'll have official training the first day, but we expect the audience to be mostly users and people coming up to speed, as well as people who have been using it for a while. So we're looking for content to make their lives easier and better. So please submit papers. And thanks for joining me for the Cloud Foundry Morning Edition, second episode, and I will see you all next week.